I stepped off the transport plane onto American soil, boots still caked with desert dust, expecting a hero's welcome, or at least a warm bed. 8 months overseas, dodging bullets and counting days until I'd see Lauren again. I'd kept it a surprise, picturing her face lighting up when I walked through the door. But when I turned the key at 2 a.m., the house was dead silent. No lights, no Lauren, just a faint smoky smell lingering in the air. I dropped my duffel, heart thudding, and flicked on the living room lamp. That's when I saw it. A scrap of paper curling in the fireplace, half-burned but legible. Chris, tomorrow, usual spot. My stomach twisted. Chris, my army buddy. The guy I'd trusted to check on her while I was gone. I told myself it was nothing. She'd mentioned him helping with the leaky roof, the busted car, small stuff. But then I noticed her coat was gone. Her keys, too. At 2 a.m., I grabbed the note, the edges crumbling in my fingers, and stared at his name. Chris, who'd pulled me out of a firefight in Kandahar. Chris, who'd toasted at our wedding. I sank onto the couch, the silence pressing in, and pulled out my pocket knife. Not to hurt anyone, just to fidget, to carve a little notch into the armrest like I used to when stress hit. It's a habit I picked up after basic training, whittling away tension. But this wasn't tension. This was a crack forming in everything I thought I knew. I sat there, replaying her calls from the last few months. Always chipper, always mentioning Chris in passing. Too much in passing. Then headlights flashed through the window. A car door slammed. I stuffed the note in my pocket and stood, pulse racing. The front door creaked open, and there she was, Lauren, hair messy, eyes wide when she saw me. Daniel? You're early. Her voice shook. I forced a smile, but my grip tightened on the knife in my pocket. Something was off, and I was about to find out what. Lauren stammered through a hug, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar, like she'd doused herself in it. I didn't expect you. I was just out grabbing milk, she said, holding up a grocery bag. I glanced inside. No milk, just a pack of gum and a receipt. But I nodded, playing along because I'd learned overseas to watch before you strike. She babbled about how thrilled she was I was home, but her eyes kept darting to the fireplace. I didn't mention the note. Not yet. Instead, I asked about her day, casual as I could manage. Oh, same old, she said, brushing hair from her face. Chris stopped by earlier to fix the garage door. Chris again. I pictured his easy grin, the way he'd slap my back and call me brother. We'd been tight since training, shared smokes, shared stories. He'd even crashed on our couch when his ex kicked him out. But now, hearing his name felt like sandpaper on a fresh cut. I excused myself to unpack, needing air, and headed to the bedroom. That's when I saw it. His truck, parked 2 streets over, barely visible through the blinds. My chest tightened. Maybe he was visiting someone else. Maybe. But then I remembered the note. Tomorrow, usual spot. This wasn't tomorrow. This was tonight. I grabbed my phone, thumb hovering over his number, but stopped. Calling would tip them off. Instead, I sat on the bed, running my knife along a scrap of wood from my bag, a piece of cedar I'd carried from base to base. The familiar motion steadied me, each curl of wood peeling away a layer of doubt. Lauren poked her head in, asking if I was okay. Just tired, I lied, smiling. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She lunged for it, fumbling, and I caught a glimpse of the screen before she turned it off. He's back early. We need to talk. From Chris. My jaw clenched. She mumbled something about work and slipped out. I stayed there, carving, the cedar scent mixing with the bitter taste of betrayal. Tomorrow, I'd follow her. I had to know. Morning came fast, gray lights spilling through the curtains. Lauren was already up, humming in the kitchen like nothing was wrong. I played the part, kissed her cheek, poured coffee, asked about her plans. Just errands, she said, too quick, stirring her mug. I nodded, sipping mine, the bitterness matching my mood. But inside, I was coiled tight, ready to move. She left around noon, claiming she needed groceries, again. I waited 5 minutes, then grabbed my keys. Her car headed downtown, weaving through traffic, and I tailed her at a distance, heart pounding like I was back on patrol. She pulled into a diner lot, the kind with chipped paint and flickering neon. I parked across the street, watching. Then Chris's truck rolled in. He climbed out, scanned the lot, and went inside. My hands gripped the wheel. I told myself it could be innocent. Friends grabbing lunch. But then she met him at a booth by the window, and their hands brushed, slow, deliberate, like they'd done it 100 times. My vision blurred. I wanted to storm in, flip the table, demand answers. Instead, I stayed put, carving a groove into the dashboard with my knife, the wood splintering under my thumb. Context hit hard. Chris had been my rock. When Laura miscarried 2 years back, he'd sat with me in silence, handing me beers until I could breathe again. Therefore, this wasn't just cheating. It was a gut punch to every memory we'd built. I watched them laugh, her head tilting the way it used to with me, and something snapped. Not loud, just a quiet cold break. She stood, kissed his cheek, and left. He lingered, scrolling his phone. I waited until her car was gone, then walked in. He looked up, grin fading. Dan? Man, when'd you get back? I slid into the booth, voice steady. Last night. Saw Lauren's note in the fireplace. Usual spot, huh? His face froze. He stammered about helping her with errands, but his eyes flicked to the door. I leaned in, knife tapping the table. Don't lie to me, Chris. He swallowed hard. Then my phone buzzed, Lauren, asking where I was. I smiled at him. Guess we'll finish this later. I drove home, Chris's shaky excuses echoing in my head. He claimed it was nothing, just coffee, just catching up. But his hands had trembled, and that told me more than his words ever could. I needed space to think, so I pulled into the garage, the familiar smell of sawdust hitting me as I stepped out. My workbench sat in the corner, tools lined up like soldiers. I grabbed a block of oak and started carving, letting the rhythm settle my nerves. My mind drifted back to the desert, Chris and me, pinned down by gunfire, sand stinging our faces. He dragged me behind a wall, cracked a joke about my terrible aim, and we'd laughed until the choppers came. That was us, brothers, not just buddies. I trusted him with my life. Therefore, seeing him with Lauren wasn't just a betrayal. It was a rewrite of everything I'd held on to. The oak took shape under my blade, a rough figure of a man, faceless for now. I thought about Lauren, too. Her voice on those late-night calls, always bright, always mentioning Chris fixing something. He's a lifesaver, she'd said once. I'd agreed, picturing him hammering nails, not this. But then I remembered her face at the diner, soft and unguarded, and the knife slipped, nicking my thumb. Blood welled up, a sharp sting pulling me back. I wrapped it in a rag, pacing the garage. She'd be home soon, expecting me to buy her story. I couldn't confront her yet, not without proof. But the note, the truck, the diner was piling up. I sat on a stool, staring at the half-carved figure, and another memory hit. Our wedding. Chris, best man, raising a glass, saying, "To Dan, the luckiest guy I know." The crowd had cheered. I believed it. Now, that toast felt like a taunt. Headlights swept the driveway. Lauren. I stashed the carving and wiped my hands, forcing calm. She walked in, all smiles, asking how my day was. Fine, I said, watching her hang her coat. Then her phone buzzed again. She silenced it fast, but not before I saw Chris's name flash. My grip tightened on the rag. This wasn't over. Lauren chattered about dinner, oblivious to the storm brewing in me. I nodded along, chopping carrots with more force than necessary, the knife thudding against the board. She didn't notice, or didn't care. But her phone kept buzzing, and each time, she'd glance at it, smile fading, then flip it face down. "Work's crazy," she muttered, stirring a pot. I didn't buy it. After we ate, she crashed early, claiming exhaustion. I waited until her breathing steadied, then slipped into the living room. Her laptop sat on the coffee table, lid half open. I hesitated. Snooping wasn't my style. But then I thought of Chris's hand on hers, and my resolve hardened. I powered it up, password still the same, our anniversary. A folder labeled Photos caught my eye. I clicked, expecting vacation shots. Instead, it was them, dozens of pictures stretching back months. Lauren laughing at a park, Chris beside her. Another at the beach, his arm around her waist. My throat closed up. This wasn't a fling. This had roots, deep ones I'd missed. I scrolled, each image a punch, until I hit one dated last July. I'd been overseas, sweating through 120-degree heat, while they grinned at a barbecue. My barbecue. I shut the laptop, hands shaking, and grabbed my knife, carving into a scrap of pine from the table. The wood split too fast, sloppy like my thoughts. Context crashed in. Chris had been around more after I deployed. Just helping out, he'd said on a call once, voice casual. Therefore, every favor, every leaky pipe, every flat tire had been a cover. I stood, pacing, when a new thought hit. Her phone. I crept back to the bedroom, lifted it from her nightstand. Unlocked, same password. Text from Chris glowed on the screen. He suspects. We need to move faster. Move what? I scrolled up. Plans, meetups, promises. My blood roared. But then the bed creaked. Lauren stirred, mumbling my name. I froze, phone in hand, as her eyes fluttered open. Daniel? What are you doing? Her voice was groggy, then sharp. I held up the phone, screen still lit. Care to explain this? She sat up, face paling, and I knew the game was up. But I wasn't ready for what came next. Lauren's eyes widened at the phone in my hand, her excuse tumbling out fast. It's not what you think. Chris was just helping me with something. Her voice cracked, but I didn't bite. I set the phone down, screen still glowing with his words, move faster, and walked out, leaving her scrambling for more lies. The garage was my refuge, the hum of the fluorescent light steadying me. I grabbed a chunk of walnut from the shelf, dark and heavy, and started carving, letting the blade bite deep. Each curl of wood peeled away a layer of her betrayal, but it wasn't enough. I needed to hit back. Context sank in. I'd spent years trusting them. Lauren with my heart, Chris with my life. Therefore, this wasn't just about catching them. It was about making them feel the weight of what they'd done. I shaped the walnut into a small box, simple but precise, my mind racing. An idea sparked, something quiet, something sharp. I finished the box by dawn, hollowed it out, and scratched a message inside. I know. Then I drove to Chris's place, 2 streets over, his truck still parked out front. He was asleep, probably smug, thinking he'd dodge me at the diner. I left the box on his porch and signed and drove off. Back home, Lauren was waiting, red-eyed, launching into a speech about needing space. You're overreacting, she said, flipping it on me. My jaw tightened. She was good, turning tears into a weapon. But I saw through it now. I nodded, playing dumb, and said, maybe you're right. She relaxed, thinking she'd won. That's when I started planning the next move. I couldn't just yell or walk away. That wasn't me. I needed them to unravel slowly, piece by piece, like a project coming apart at the seams. The box was step 1, a seed of doubt. I sat at the kitchen table, sketching ideas on a napkin, when her phone buzzed again. She didn't grab it this time, just stare pale. I smiled, casual as ever. You gonna get that? She didn't. And I knew Chris had found the box. The game was on. Lauren stayed, quiet all morning, tiptoeing around me like I might explode. I let her stew, pretending everything was fine, coffee, small talk, the works. But my head was spinning with those photos from her laptop. Timestamps burned into my brain. July 4th, me sweating overseas, them grinning at my grill. August 12th, her birthday, Chris's arm around her. I needed more, something concrete to bury them. So when she left for work, I went back to the laptop. She'd changed the password. Smart, but not smart enough. I tried her mom's maiden name. Bingo. The photo folder was still there, but I dug deeper this time. Emails, cloud backups, anything. Then I found it. A hidden file labeled C. Inside, a video. My hands shook as I clicked play. It was them, at our cabin upstate, laughing by the lake. Dated 3 months ago, right after I called her, homesick, saying I couldn't wait to get back. Chris toasted the camera, saying to freedom. Freedom from what? Me? The knife came out, slicing into a pine scrap on the desk, with shavings piling up. Context hit like a freight train. This wasn't a slip-up. They'd built a whole life behind my back, using my own places, my own trust. Therefore, the box wasn't enough. I needed to twist the knife deeper. I copied the video to a drive, mind racing. Confronting them now would just get denials, tears, excuses. No, I'd wait, let them think they were safe. Lauren came home late, claiming overtime. I smiled. Asked about her day, watched her squirm. Fine, she said, voice tight. Then Chris called me. First time since the diner. Hey man, you dropped something off? He asked, casual but off. I played dumb. Like what? He hesitated. Just a box. Weird carving inside. I laughed, light as air. Sounds like a prank. You okay? He mumbled, yeah. Hung up fast. I knew he was sweating now. Staring at that message, I know. The video sat on my desk, a loaded gun. I carve another piece, a jagged shape this time, and plan the next strike. They'd built this lie together. I'd tear it down the same way, together. Chris's call stuck with me. He sounded rattled, but he wouldn't crack yet. I needed to push harder, make them feel me closing in. The walnut box was a start, a whisper of trouble, but I wanted to shout. So I leaned into what I knew best, precision. Back in the garage, I pulled out a slab of cherry wood, smooth and rich, and sketched a design. A sculpture, abstract but pointed. Two figures, tangled, one breaking apart. Subtle enough for deniability, sharp enough to sting. I spent hours carving, the whine of the sander filling the silence. Context crept in. Lauren loved that cabin video. Her laugh, so carefree, like I didn't exist. Therefore, this sculpture would be my first real jab, a public one. Our town had a charity auction coming up, big deal locally, and I'd donated pieces before. I called the organizer, said I had something special this year. Dropped it off the next day, titled it Trust. The room buzzed when they unveiled it. People saw art, I saw a grenade. Lauren was there, mingling, clueless until she spotted it. Her smile froze. Chris showed up late, eyes darting to me across the crowd. I waved, friendly as ever, and bid on a lamp I didn't want. The sculpture sold for $300. Some lawyer bought it, oblivious. But the whispers started. Looks personal, someone said. Daniel's got a dark side. Perfect. After, Chris cornered me by the parking lot, voice low. What's with the statue, man? You trying to say something? I shrugged. Just art. You see something in it. He glared, but doubt flickered in his eyes. He drove off fast. Lauren was quieter on the ride home, picking at her nails. Nice piece, she muttered. Thanks, I said, grinning. She didn't push it, but the air between us thickened. Back in the garage, I started another carving, smaller, sharper, when my phone lit up. A text from an old army buddy, Nick. Heard Chris is job hunting out of state. You cool. Might get twisted. Job hunting? Out of state? I gripped the knife harder. They weren't just hiding, they were planning an exit. Time to tighten the noose. Nick's text burned a hole in my pocket. Chris looking for jobs out of state wasn't just gossip. It was a signal. They were spooked, ready to bolt. Lauren played it cool at home. All smiles, and how was your day? But her eyes kept flicking to her phone. I let her think I was clueless, frying eggs while she scrolled. Then I heard it, her whispering in the hall, voice low. We need to move the timeline up. Timeline? My grip on the spatula tightened, but I stayed quiet, flipping the eggs like nothing was wrong. She hung up fast when I walked in, mumbling about a work call. Sure. Context slammed me. That video, the photos, now this, they weren't just sneaking around. They were building a runway out of my life. Therefore, I had to act fast, keep them off balance. I waited until she showered, then checked her phone. Unlocked, sloppy of her. A new text from Chris, Friday. Meet me at the diner. 2 days away. I memorized it, put the phone back, and headed to the garage. The cherrywood shavings still littered the floor from the auction piece, but I grabbed a fresh block, maple this time, and carved a tiny key, pointless but calming. My mind churned. Friday at the diner. I could show up, blow it wide open. But no, that was too easy. I needed them trapped, not just caught. Lauren came downstairs later, hair wet, asking if I'd seen her charger. By the couch, I said, casual, watching her fidget. She was unraveling good. The next day, I tailed her again. She didn't go to work, just drove to the bank, stayed inside 20 minutes, then left with a thick envelope. Cash. My pulse spiked. Back home, she hid in her dresser, thinking I was out. I wasn't. I saw it all from the window, carving a notch into the porch rail to keep my hand steady. Friday was coming, and they were accelerating. Money, plans, whispers. I sat on the couch that night, sketching a new idea, a trap, not just a jab. Her phone buzzed again, Chris. She silenced it, but I caught his words through the hum. He's on to us. She glanced at me, pale. I smiled back. Let her sweat. Friday morning hit like a storm warning. Lauren was up early, fussing with her hair, claiming a meeting. I nodded, sipping coffee, watching her pack that envelope into her purse. She kissed my cheek, cold, perfunctory, and left. I waited 10 minutes, then grabbed my gear, a voice recorder small enough to hide, and my knife for luck. The diner was my target. I got there first, parked out of sight, and slipped inside. The booth they'd used before was empty. Perfect. I rigged the recorder under the table, taped tight, and walked out before anyone noticed. Context clicked. They thought they were slick, meeting in public like it was safe. Therefore, I turned their spot into a snare. I lingered across the street, carving a twig into nothing, waiting. Lauren pulled up at noon, Chris right behind. They sat heads close, voices hushed. I couldn't hear, but the recorder would. An hour later, they left. Her to work, him to wherever. I retrieved the device, heart pounding, and listened to my truck. Static, then Chris. He's sniffing around. We leave next week. New jobs, new place. Lauren, what if he follows? Chris laughed. He won't. Too proud. My fist clenched, snapping the twig. Next week? Jobs. They were running. But then Chris dropped a bomb. Should have pushed him harder back then. Kept him overseas. Lauren hushed him, but it landed. Push me? My mind raced. Deployment extensions, paperwork snafus. Had he meddled? I drove home, replaying it, the knife digging into my dash. That night, I uploaded the audio, edited anonymous to a local Facebook group, tagged friends, family, everyone. Found this at the diner. Thoughts? I posted, then waited. The explosion was instant. Comments, shares, outrage. Lauren's phone lit up like a fireworks show. She silenced it, face white. Chris called her, panicked, but she didn't answer. I sat there, carving a thin strip of cedar, acting oblivious. Something wrong? I asked. She stammered, just work drama. The group blew up. People recognized their voices. By midnight, Chris texted me, call this off, man. I didn't reply. Lauren stared at me, trembling. What did you do? She whispered. I smiled, set the carving down. Just listened. The trap was sprung, but Chris's words pushed me, echoed louder. Lauren's whisper, what did you do? Hung in the air, her face a mask of panic. I shrugged, twirling the cedar strip between my fingers, and said, people talk. Guess they heard something juicy. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, her sister, even her boss, all asking about the recording. She fumbled for excuses, voice rising, then turned it on me. You're ruining us over nothing. Nothing? I almost laughed, but I saw the opening, her desperation, and took it. If it's nothing, tell me the truth, I said, calm as stone. She hesitated, eyes wet, then caved. Okay, Chris and I, we got close. But it's over, Daniel. I swear. Her tears flowed, a performance I might have bought a year ago. Context hit. She'd lied for months, built a life with him. Therefore, this confession wasn't remorse. It was a lifeline. I nodded, softening my voice. All right, let's move past it. Her shoulders slumped with relief. Too soon. I wasn't done. The next day, she went to clear her head, but I knew she'd run to Chris. I followed, keeping my distance, and watched her slip into his place. Through the window, I saw them arguing, gesturing wild. Good, they were cracking. I sat in my truck, carving a jagged edge into a scrap of oak, letting the recorder's fallout do its work. By evening, the Facebook group was a wildfire, people piecing it together, tagging Chris's employer, Lauren's coworkers. She came home late, defeated, and tried hugging me. I let her, playing the forgiving husband, but my mind was on the next move. Chris called me that night, voice tight. You win, okay? Delete it. I chuckled. Too late. It's out there. He cursed, hung up. I leaned back, sketching a new carving, a broken chain, while Lauren slept upstairs, oblivious to the news tightening. Her lie bought me time. My mercy was a feint. The recording had exposed them, but Chris's slip pushed him, not at me. What did he mean? I dug through old deployment emails that night, hands shaking. Extensions, delays, all flagged by his unit. My gut sank. This wasn't just an affair. It was sabotage, and I'd make him pay for both. Chris's slip on the recording should have pushed him harder, lit a fuse I couldn't douse. I spent the night combing through emails, finding threads I'd ignored, delays in my redeployment, flagged by CEO. He'd been in logistics back then, had pull. Had he stalled me to keep me gone? I gripped my knife, carving deep into a pine block, the wood splitting under pressure. Context burned. He'd toasted my wedding, saved my life, then twisted the knife when I wasn't looking. Therefore, the diner trap wasn't enough. I needed them cornered, raw. Friday's recording gave me leverage, but I wanted more. I drove to the diner at dawn, same booth, and planted the recorder again, betting they'd meet to regroup. They did. Midday, frantic. I listened from my truck later. Lauren, he knows everything. We're done. Chris, not if we leave now tonight. My pulse spiked. Tonight? I tailed Chris home, watched him pack his truck, duffel bags, boxes. Lauren was next, sneaking out with that bank envelope. They thought they'd slip away, start fresh. Not on my watch. I raced home, uploaded a second clip, him saying leave tonight, and tagged every local I knew. Anyone seen these two around? I posted. The group erupted again, sightings, speculation. By dusk, Chris called, furious. You're sick, man. Stop this. I laughed. You stopped me from coming home. Fair's fair. He went silent, then hung up. I sat in the garage, carving a thin blade shape, when Lauren burst in, eyes wild. You leaked more? Are you insane? I set the knife down. You're leaving tonight, right? With him. She froze, caught. We were scared, she stammered. Scared of me? Good. Headlights flashed. Chris's truck, peeling into the driveway. He stormed up, banging on the door. Dan, face me. I stepped out calm, recorder in my pocket, still rolling. He shoved me. I didn't budge. You tank my life, my job's gone, he yelled. I leaned in. You tank mine first. Overseas, remember? His face twisted, guilt, rage, fear. Lauren screamed for us to stop, but I saw it in his eyes. Truth. He'd rigged my deployment. The trap snapped shut. Now I'd finish it. Chris's shove left a bruise on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. His confession was louder. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he spat, stepping back as Lauren tugged his arm. You kept me out there, I said, voice low, so you could have her. He didn't deny it, just glared, chest heaving. Lauren sobbed. We're sorry, okay? Just stop. I turned away, letting them stew, and locked the door. The recorder caught it all, his half-admission, her pleas. I uploaded it that night. No caption, just raw audio. By morning, the fallout was nuclear. Chris's boss fired him. Public scandal, bad optics. Lauren's office put her on leave. Her sister texted me, furious, but I didn't reply. The group post piled up. Neighbors, army buddies, strangers piling on. I sat in the garage, carving a rough plank, the knife steady while my head spun. Context sank in. I'd trusted them with everything. My home, my future. Therefore, this wreckage wasn't just revenge. It was justice, jagged and cold. Lauren packed a bag that afternoon, eyes hollow. I'm going to my mom's, she said, voice flat. I nodded, didn't argue. She paused at the door, whispering, I didn't want this. Then she was gone. Chris vanished too, truck missing by noon. I drove past his place. It was empty, blinds down. The town buzzed. People stared at me in the store, whispered behind hands. I didn't care. Back home, I listened to the last recording again. His voice didn't mean for it to go this far. Liar. He'd meant every step. I carved deeper, the plank taking shape, a shield splintered at the edges. My phone lit up. Nick, my army buddy, heard Chris bolted. You good? I texted back, yeah. But I wasn't. The house felt like a tomb. Her stuff half gone, his shadow everywhere. I walked the rooms, knife in hand, notching the walls, small marks like scars. The chaos I'd unleashed was working. Careers trashed, lives upended, but it didn't fill the hole. I sat on the porch, staring at the dark street, and wondered if I'd pushed too far. Then I heard it, a car engine close. My grip tightened. The engine growled closer, headlights cutting through the dusk. I stood, knife still in hand, expecting Chris, maybe back for a fight. But it was Nick, stepping out of his beat-up Jeep, brow furrowed. "You look like hell, man," he said, climbing the porch steps. I forced a grin, pocketing the blade. "Been a long week." He nodded, eyeing the notched railing. "Heard the mess online. Chris and Lauren, they're toast." I shrugged, but his next words hit harder. "People say you went too far, scaring folks." Scaring folks? I hadn't thought of that. Context crept in. I'd wanted them to hurt, to lose what I'd lost: home, trust, time. Therefore, the recordings, the public shredding, it worked. But now the town saw me differently. Not a soldier, not a craftsman, just a guy with a vendetta. Nick sat beside me, quiet, then asked, "Worth it?" I didn't answer. The plank I'd carved, a splintered shield, sat by my feet, rough and unfinished. I'd spent days cutting into them, but now my hands felt empty. Lauren's mom called later, voice shaking. "She's a wreck, Daniel. You happy?" I hung up. No words. Chris's old CO emailed too. Confirmed he'd flagged my extensions years back. Personal reasons. Proof, cold and late. I carve another notch into the porch, deeper this time, the wood groaning. The cost was sinking in, not just theirs but mine. Friends stopped texting. Neighbors crossed the street. The garage, once my sanctuary, smelled like sawdust and regret. I finished the shield that night, sanding it smooth, but it didn't feel right, too perfect for what I'd become. I tore them down, sure, Chris jobless, Lauren shamed, but the mirror was brutal. I wasn't the guy who'd left for deployment, steady and sure. I was sharper now, harder, like the blade I couldn't put down. Nick left after a beer, clapping my shoulder. "You're still you," he said. Was I? Headlights flashed again, Lauren's car, pulling up slow. She stepped out, bag in hand, eyes red. "I need to talk," she said, voice small. I nodded, bracing myself. The fallout wasn't done. I'd ripped their world apart, but mine was still crumbling. Lauren stood there, clutching her bag like a shield, the porch light casting shadows under her eyes. "I'm not here to fight," she said, voice raw. I owe you the truth." I leaned against the rail, knife tapping my thigh, and waited. She took a breath. "It started after you left. Chris was around. I was lonely. Then he said you'd volunteered to stay longer." I believed him. Volunteered? My jaw tightened. She kept going. He put me to lean on him. I didn't see it till too late. Context crashed in. Chris hadn't just taken her. He'd engineered it, warped her head while I was stuck overseas. Therefore, my revenge wasn't misplaced, but it wasn't complete either. I stepped closer. He rigged my deployment. "You know that?" Her eyes widened, then dropped. I suspected. After a while. Suspected. She'd still chosen him. I turned away, carving a final notch into the rail, the wood splitting clean. She whispered, "I'm sorry," and left, engine fading into the night. I stood there, alone, the shield carving at my feet. The next day, I packed a box, photos, her mug, small stuff, and drove to Chris's old place. Empty, like I'd figured. I left a new piece on the porch. A plaque, loyalty burned into it, simple and final. No, just that. Driving back, the weight shifted. I'd burned their lives down, his career, her reputation, but the cost was mine too. Friends gone, town wary, me harder than I'd ever been. I stopped at the lake, same spot from their video, and tossed a knife in. It sank, ripple spreading, then gone. Back home, I sanded the shield smooth, hung it above the fireplace, splintered but whole. I wasn't the guy I'd been, but I wasn't lost either. The reckoning wasn't victory, it was clarity. They'd pay forever. I'd live with it. I sat back, beer in hand, the quiet settling in. Thank you for tuning into this story. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you're watching from right now. Let us know in the comments.